3, 2, and 1.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for tonight's event on Jean-Michel Basquiat. We are very lucky to have with us Jordana Saggese, the internationally recognized expert on the work of Basquiat, as well as Gwendolyn Dubois, a renowned art historian of art and culture in the United States, who specializes in issues of race, class, gender, and sexuality. They will be discussing Saggese's Reading Basquiat, exploring ambivalence in American art, picture here, and celebrating the newly released Jean-Michel Basquiat Reader, shown here. With an artist as iconic as Basquiat, it can be really difficult to resist getting wrapped up in the cult of personality. Saggese, however, possesses a firm integrity in her approach. She is less interested in the myths of his identity and more invested in cultivating the critical position Basquiat holds in the landscape of contemporary art. The result is a treasure trove of precisely chosen resources for anyone looking to grasp a true understanding of the artist. In the Basquiat Reader, Saggese compiles various interviews from those in his close circle, collects poignant reviews from his time, such as René Ricard's seminal review in Art Forum, and gathers important posthumous criticism, including essays by Hilton Als, Bell Hooks, and a razor-sharp piece by Lorraine O'Grady. It is a truly essential addition to Basquiat's scholarship, and we're very lucky to have them both here with us today. Some more background on Jordana Saggese. She is an associate professor of American art at the University of Maryland, College Park, and editor-in-chief of the College Art Association's Art Journal. She was previously associate professor of contemporary art and theory at California College of the Arts. Gwendolyn Dubois is the class of 1940 bicentennial term chair in the History of Art department at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her PhD in art history from Stanford University and has served on the faculty Harvard University and as the senior historian and director of research, publications, and scholarly programs at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery. Just a reminder, following the discussion this evening, there will be a short Q&A. So if you have any questions at any point this evening, we urge you to send them over to evan@192books.com and we'll do our best to get them answered. So without any further ado, I will pass it on over to Gwendolyn. Thank you so much.
Here we go. Thank you, Victoria. It's so great to be here. I'm sorry I was muted. And it's fantastic to be here with you, Jordana, to talk about this new project and to talk about your long history with Jean-Michel Basquiat. I understand we're going to do something a little different tonight. I'm kind of excited about it. We're going to do Basquiat by the numbers. This isn't Sesame Street, but it is Basquiat by the numbers. So maybe you could share your screen and unmute, and we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that I do have preschoolers in my house, but this was not inspired by Sesame Street. I'm actually, I think, in the various lockdowns we found ourselves in for the last several months, right? I found myself in very close proximity to my partner, who is a mathematician. So I've been thinking a lot about numbers, and I'm going to share with you this presentation. Hopefully you can see everything. And, I've just realized, in the last month or two that, I've spent about, more than 20 years working on Jean-Michel Basquiat, so thinking about him, researching, writing. And, it's a really interesting moment to look back, as, was said in the introduction, he's so iconic and so well known. And when I was actually starting out, in 2001 on this project, it was really kind of a risky move for an art historian to work on someone who had only been dead for 12 years. So yeah, should we just get started with some numbers?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay. All right.
27? 27. That's your age right now, right?
Yes, exactly. That's my dream age at the moment. No, 27 is that sort of iconic age, right? This is the age at which Jean-Michel died tragically, suddenly. And it's also sort of a number that he, unfortunately shares with a lot of other cultural heroes who died at 27. Thinking of like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, right? This is a number that really interests me because, from the very beginning, right, dying at 27, it automatically granted Jean sort of this mythic status, right? And this was really, as was said earlier, one of my primary occupations in working with this artist is to really thinking about the degree to which his personal mythologies may have eclipsed sort of really the critical appraisal of his many, many contributions.
27. I remember 27. It was a good year for me. I was happy though that I didn't die.
We're all happy, Gwen.
Graduate school was difficult. 3.
Yeah, so 3, I'm sure you recognize this image. This is the number of points on that characteristic Basquiat crown. This is something that we see sort of, as almost a ubiquitous sort of identification of Basquiat with this symbol, this motif. I was once told, I don't know if this is true or not, by a gallery dealer that a work that does not have a crown on it is less valuable in the market.
Oh, wow.
People really want the crown, right? And it makes sense. I mean, I remember way back when, the letterhead of the estate of the artist was this crown, or a version of this crown. And I've also seen, recently in our sort of pop culture, social media world, I see a lot of people that have this crown tattooed on themselves, or maybe even a face like portrait of Jean. I haven't gone there myself, but it's a lovely gesture.
Yeah, the crown is really iconic, isn't it? And it appears all over the place in popular culture today.
Yeah, and it's, I was just wearing today, my baseball hat it's a black hat with this crown on it. And, I think it's funny because often people ask me, do you have a lot of Basquiat things, right? Because I'm, the serious art historian, like I'm not taking part, right, in the sort of commercialization, but absolutely everything. I have all the things. So I have the shorts, the pants, the sweatshirts, the baseball hats. I think there's something really unique about how present this artist is in our daily lives through sort of the clothes we wear and the things we see. It's something that I don't know if this is something we could have anticipated back in that sort of period of the early mid to mid 1980s.
Mm-hmm. And in the Julian Schnabel film, for example, in the very beginning, when we're introduced to Jean-Michel Basquiat as a child, looking at Guernica, that crown descends on his head.
Yeah. It's a really, I don't know of, many other artists that have such an iconic thing. I mean, the only one I can think of is someone like Dali, right? Have these sort of motifs and tropes that they repeat over and over. And that was something that, really set Jean apart is this ideal of reproducing the same imagery over and over. Which of course is not new when we think about pop artists, right, and appropriation. But what was unique, I think, about this artist is that he is, in most cases, sort of appropriating himself. And so he's not repeating sort of the iconography of popular or commercial culture, right? Like we're thinking of with someone like Warhol, or he's not repeating things he's taking from the newspaper. He's repeating his own drawings. And it becomes sort of this personal vocabulary that I find really compelling.
Yeah, cool. 110,500,000. That's a big number.
Yes. And it's still the biggest number, right? When we're thinking about an American artist at auction. This was a record that this Basquiat painting you're looking at here, Untitled 1982, set in May of 2017. This is the collector that you're looking at here, sort of a Japanese collector sitting there looking back at his painting. And, you know, in the years since this happened, you know, this painting has been loaned and shown around the world as part of, you know, sort of this gesture of goodwill from this collector, which has been really beautiful to see. But this is an important number because this is, as I said, a record for a work by an American artist, for a work by an African-American artist, for the first work produced after 1980 to fetch more than $100 million. And this is a really historic moment, not only because it solidifies Basquiat in sort of this pantheon, right, of other artists like Picasso and Francis Bacon and Andy Warhol, right? But it's also sort of, you know, one of the numbers that really shocks me because I actually, when this happened, I was on maternity leave and not checking my email. And I had an unreturned email message and a voicemail message from NPR's All Things Considered, because they were very interested in this story and I didn't pick up the phone. So it'll always be the thing that like I missed out. I didn't get to be on NPR. And, you know, it's really, again, a unique position, I think, for an art historian, right? Because we're not typically involved in the art world. But being someone who works on Jean-Michel Basquiat, I've always kind of got to have a kind of a foot in the art world and thinking about collectors and auctions. And, you know, in many cases, going to the auctions, the previews, when we could do such things, to actually see works in person that I wouldn't be able to see otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the art market plays such a big part in Basquiat's legacy, in the way that we see him today. And I can't help myself now looking for the crown and looking for the 3 points on top of the skull.
Yeah, it's missing, right?
It's missing.
Yeah, but you know, this is one of a series of really beautiful skulls that Jean-Michel did. And, you know, it is such a classic sort of art historical subject, right? Of sort of these still lives. And I think in so many ways, you know, the work of the artist was to really place himself in a history of art, because many critics were unwilling to do that during his lifetime, right? As you said, you know, the market was always important for Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was always selling work and he was always successful. And that created a lot of skepticism amongst cultural critics at the moment, who were themselves sort of steeped in Marxism and believed that sort of this fetishization of the object, this reliance on the market, meant that an artist couldn't necessarily be a member of the avant-garde. And we see that, you know, with the artist, he's aware of this conundrum. And, you know, I argue that he tries to insert himself into a history of art through his subjects, right, through his appropriations. And, you know, this is a really great example of taking sort of a very classic subject, right, from the history of art, a skull, right, commentary on mortality, right, and all these sort of very big questions, and putting that, right, as his main subject for us here.
Yeah, fully, this giant memento mori, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
800.
Yeah.
What is 800?
This is an
was that a Gladiator movie? 800? No, that was 300.
300.
Okay, 800.
Although this is like a little bit of a warrior.
Yeah, it was a good guess.
Yeah, no, this is, you know, the approximate number of paintings that Jean-Michel Basquiat created between 1979, this is the year that he's provided access to art materials in a studio space, through his death in August of 1988. So this is an incredible amount of work to produce in just under a decade. And this doesn't include, we have also, you know, more than 2,000 works on paper. We have a smattering of smaller works, collages on postcards, for example, that he made with a collaborator. Jennifer Stein and sold them on the street. And then we have about 30 sculptural objects, very few, but, maybe people would know most readily if they're Basquiat fans, they might know the football helmet with the sort of hair attached to the top, right? I'm counting that as one of these sculptural objects.
Mm-hmm. So 800 paintings in
Mm-hmm.
less than a decade, like almost 100 paintings a year.
Yeah.
Right? You think about a contemporary artist like Njideka Akinyele Crosby, who does maybe 3 or 4 paintings a year.
Yeah.
That was a lot of work.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. And I think it's, he's extremely prolific. And I think, I argue in the first book that, one of the ways that he comes up with in terms of working, right, approaches is that he ends up sort of taking these motifs or these collections, these photocopies of drawings, and sort of deploying them on multiple works. And he does that, I think, in it sort of, it's in the interest of speed, right? But there is a layer of, conceptual complexity with the ways in which this photocopy appears on one canvas versus appears on another canvas. An example would be, a photocopied head that we have from a collection of drawings known as the Darros collection. They're produced between 1982 and 1983. And he photocopied one of those and deployed it on a canvas, and it becomes sort of Toussaint L'Ouverture, right? Sort of the Haitian revolutionary. And then on another, it becomes Papa Doc, Francois Duvalier, the Haitian dictator, right? So he's sort of moving between these, these people, these histories, these concepts by deploying these things for rapid fire. And one of the things that really interests me is that, when we're looking at the criticism, right, and a lot of it I reproduced in The New Reader, when we look at the criticism, a lot of people don't really know what to do with that. They don't know what to do with this idea of repetition, because we as sort of an art public tend to rely on spontaneity, right? Originality, right? This is sort of the rhetoric of abstract expressionism, right? And so it's strange to a lot of critics, and they don't know how to handle the fact that he is appropriating and repeating and copying and pasting. But as I say in the first book, I actually draw a line of correspondence back to bebop improvisation, and someone like Charlie Parker that we know Jean really admired, listened to. His live recordings were very popular, and Charlie Parker was someone who's similarly prolific, right? Tons and tons and tons of recordings and albums and live improvisations and all of this. But what's really interesting is when you think about Charlie Parker and how fast he's improvising, right? Like 8, 9, 10 notes per second. He also is relying on these little discrete collections of notes, motifs, right? Some only a few notes long, others longer. And he is rearranging and inserting them in multiple improvisations as he goes, as a way to do it quickly. And I think that's something that we see a lot in music and musical improvisation, and something that I think Jean-Michel is doing in his visual, right, work, and visually appropriating all of these things. And that allows him to make 800 paintings.
Yeah. So he's gathering this visual language together and then kind of sampling it, right, and resampling it and deploying it over and over again. I mean, it's a very modernist thing. If you think back to poets like Gertrude Stein, who were all about repetition, a rose is a rose is a rose, or going through a story and repeating a line every 4 or 5 pages in a slightly different way to bring out something new.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it is a very sort of modernist technique. And when I wrote the first book, most people had really just not recognized that. It's really interesting to me, sort of the myopic view that criticism had of Jean during his lifetime. It's always struck me that, these things, like, the ways that we understand modernism today, right, were not the ways that we understood modernism in the 1980s. The way we talk about identity today was not the way we talked about identity in the 1980s. And I really do think that a lot of the ways that we begin to understand our history of art and interpret it, the vocabulary we have today, he really just kind of missed the cutoff in a lot of ways. So it is, you know, a lot of my work is sort of that revisionist sort of going back. And I think that there are, you know, a lot of other scholars, and I reproduce, you know, their essays in the book because I think they were fundamental to my understanding of what Basquiat was doing with these sort of, you know, nods to modernist appropriation and repetition.
Okay. 2. Oh, the numbers are getting smaller again.
Yeah.
Okay, 2.
There's no order.
No, okay.
It only makes sense in my mind. But yeah, 2 is, you know, in contrast to that 800, it's a really stark contrast, you know, because 2 is the number of paintings by Basquiat in permanent collections that are public in New York.
No way.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, they're at the
only 2?
There's that Whitney Museum. MoMA has 12 drawings. The Brooklyn Museum has 2 works on paper. And this goes back to that larger question of market, right? That Jean-Michel Basquiat, you know, was so successful in the market that it, on the one hand, prevented museums from collecting, right? They're not able or willing to pay those large sums, right, for works in that period. And it also, as I said, it was tricky. It was tricky because, you know, people really didn't understand if he was going to be sort of a flash in the pan or if it was going to be a big artist. And so we do have some reports of collectors being turned away by museums when they tried to donate work. So, you know, the result is a really interesting situation for an art historian to try to get at works, to see works, right? If I wanted to study, you know, William Johnson, right, I could go to DC and I could see 12 works at National Gallery, and then I could go, you know, I mean, it's different, right? So that just meant that I had to make a lot of friends in the process. And spend a lot of research money. I wasn't traveling to go to archives because there's no public archives for Basquiat, but I was traveling to see exhibitions so that I could see the works in person. That would be my only opportunity. And also those auction houses.
So there are 2 in public collections or publicly accessible in museums in New York. Is it different on the West Coast in California? Or other parts of the US? Or is it about the same?
It's about the same. You know, I think I'm always surprised. There are some museums that have them. I mean, I live in Maryland, and there's a museum here, a private museum, the Glenstone, that has a Basquiat, right? So there are these smatterings. There's one in Cleveland. You know, there's a big collection in Miami, but mostly private. And there are, you know, a few collectors that have large sort of amounts of Basquiat work. So like the Brandt Foundation, the Broad, and the Broad is now a museum. So we can see, I think they have 7 or maybe 8 paintings where you can see them in Los Angeles. So, you know, it's, you know, again, another interesting turn within the art world that, you know, typically we would expect that by this point, right, we're talking about, you know, 35 years after the death of the artist, we would expect that these works would begin to filter into public collections. But instead we're seeing the founding of private museums. And so that's a really interesting twist that I don't think anyone saw coming.
Yeah, it really has been a major shift in how we see art, hasn't it? Okay. 17. Yeah. I think that's how old I was when I saw this film.
That's how old I was when I saw this film.
No, then I must have been 27. Okay. It was good though. Some of my favorite people. Yeah,
it was a wonderful film. And, you know, I always tell this to my students, right, is that, you know, my interest in Basquiat, I am not someone who was raised in an intellectual household. I didn't go to art museums as a kid. I really just left my senior prom early and went to Blockbuster and rented this video with friends. And I saw this movie and I was just completely awestruck, right? By, you know, the acting is incredible. I mean, David Bowie as Andy Warhol was really fantastic. But just also, you know, they had made paintings for the film that were subsequently destroyed, right, in the style of Basquiat, some copies. And I was just immediately entranced. I mean, I had no idea that, you know, what I was looking at on the screen was painting. What I knew as painting is what I'd seen in like tours of, you know, Andrew Jackson's Hermitage Museum, which is in Nashville where I grew up, right? So, you know, white people, portraits, you know, on the walls in the fire, you know, above the fireplace. I didn't understand that this could be painting, and I was just immediately struck by it. I didn't know I was going to become an art historian at that moment, but, you know, I did sort of have my very first interests. And, you know, fun fact is I have a picture of this night, right? It was my prom. So I have a picture of myself the day I learned about Jean-Michel Basquiat.
So I must have been 27 or something. I was a little bit older, but I remember seeing this film, and I was in art school, I think at the time, at California College of the Arts, which was then California College of Arts and Crafts. And I had classmates who tried to paint like Jean-Michel Basquiat. Everybody was like scrawling, and it was, you know, not good work, but it had become very popular and almost like a phase that art students were going through. And I think they still do. Many of them have a Jean-Michel Basquiat phase.
Yeah, I think the emulation of Basquiat is something that's really interesting to me, you know, because it's always been an artist that I think has been more accepted, more promoted, popularized by systems and people that are typically outside of the so-and-so, like the so-called art world, right? It's usually like musicians and art school students, right? And YouTube stars that really pick up on Jean-Michel Basquiat. And I think there's something about his work that really speaks to, you know, young artists. I think that there's a level of, you know, expressiveness and gesture and painterliness. And, you know, this idea that, you know, it's just, what's always attracted me is just the sheer complexity of it all. And that's something that I find that artists who are trying to like imitate don't really get, is that sort of layer upon layer of complexity, right? Not just the surface quality, right, which can be built up in several layers, but the layers of references, right, that are historical and political and going to Haiti and Puerto Rico and the United States and Rome, right? I think that there's something there that you're really kind of getting a picture of all of his influences at one moment, right? So some of these snapshots of all of these intersections that are at play in his own studio, right? And in his own mind.
Yeah, and Schnabel sort of had to go through his own Basquiat phase by making those paintings that got destroyed, didn't he?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
There you go. Okay. One. Oh, okay. One. What is one?
So one was the number of books that I could find on the work of Jean-Michel Basquiat when I was still that teenager in Nashville, Tennessee. And I actually bought this book. I still have it on my shelf. It's a catalog produced by Tony Shafrazi. And I bought it for myself at the Tower Books on West End Avenue. It was $90, which is a lot of money for me. And I was just, you know, I sort of carried it around, you know, for the rest of high school and for and all of college. It was always there for me. But it was also interesting to think about the fact that it was it. That was the only one I could find, right? That was all that was out there, you know, in 1997, 1998.
Really, only one, and produced by a gallery, not an academic text, not a museum catalog.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, mostly, you know, the galleries are the ones that can afford to produce these big books, to have works photographed. You know, there were certain galleries, right? The work of Jean-Michel Basquiat was, you know, is held by several galleries, right? So Gagosian, Shafrazi, Bishopberger, galleries in France, Tokyo, right? Sort of, they all have a little piece. And so it's very difficult to get a full picture of what is available. You know, what's in Shafrazi's catalog is what passed through Shafrazi, right?
Okay.
And so it's a partial view of the body of work. And we will always only have a partial view of what Jean-Michel Basquiat produced. You know, he wasn't, as many 27-year-old artists are, not a great record keeper. And so we don't have sort of copious records of what was sold, who it was sold to, just the very basics. Some of the paintings, if you followed Basquiat for a while, you'll notice that some of the titles shift of the works even. And that's because a dealer might have named them. If there's not a title on the back, there might be multiple titles on the back. And so we don't know which one is the title. So everything is a little bit sort of, unstable when we're dealing with sort of the catalog.
It's a very different way of working. If we think about a lot of contemporary artists today, when they're big on the market, they have a whole studio with assistants and everything's computerized, and maybe he had a composition notebook or something like that at the most, right? But it was a very different moment, I think.
Yeah, it was a very different moment. This was really the late 1980s art world is really kind of the beginning of the art world we know now, right? Where artists were becoming celebrities and sort of superstars, that they were selling work while they were alive for 200 to 500% more a couple of years after they'd made it. This is something that was completely new. So, a lot of artists like Jean-Michel were sort of catching up to this and not really understanding what things had to be put in place. The other thing that, put him a little bit at a disadvantage is that, or put me at a disadvantage as a historian, is that, he didn't have many consistent relationships with dealers during his lifetime. And so, typically when you have an artist that's represented by a gallery, that the gallery is providing that support and that structure, right? And that registrar. But, his longest relationship was with Bruno Bishopberger in Switzerland. But, in the US, he was kind of back and forth a lot between galleries, and that really prevented a really cohesive picture of what he was producing.
Oh, that's too bad. 0. I was going to say there's not a number smaller than 1, but
here we
your
are.
mathematician partner would tell me that's not true.
Yeah, this is, I always bring this up because this is sort of the number of serious monographic studies that I encountered when I, went to look up Basquiat when I got to college. I was convinced even when I went to graduate school that, there's got to be a lot out there about this artist, and I just haven't found it yet. But the more I looked, the more he wasn't there, right? I always say that, Jean-Michel Basquiat is an artist that's sort of everywhere and nowhere. If you 0 is the number of folders on Jean-Michel Basquiat in the Smithsonian's Archives of American Art, 0, right? Not a single one. And so when I set out on this project, right, 20 years ago, I had basically a, tattered copy of a biography of Jean written by Phoebe Hoban. I'm on my 5th or 6th copy now. For some reason, I loan it out and never get it back. I had sort of assembled a collection of every review that had been published during his lifetime. I had, there's a really expensive 2-volume Catalogue Raisonné produced by Enrico Navarra in 2000 that I could access at my university library. And then I had sort of, some exhibition catalog essays, right? Which, are wonderful. And I always think of catalog essays, and I write catalog essays, right, as being sort of a series of provocations, right? It's very different. It's not necessarily sort of the critical scholarly, right, end game that we expect when we're thinking about monographs. So, this really left me in an awkward position where I had to I didn't have a lot of primary sources. And so I kind of set out in the project to make a lot of friends and to meet some of the people that could help me piece together this history.
Yeah. I remember when I started teaching contemporary African-American visual culture, African-American art at Harvard in 2000, I used the Bell Hooks essay.
Yeah.
And I think I also had maybe at that time the José Esteban Munoz essay on Basquiat and Warhol. on disidentification. And like, that was it. You know, there was nothing else I could find that I felt, you know, would offer my students a critical viewpoint that they could, you know, discuss with me in a really generative way. So it's amazing.
Those are two of my favorite essays, and I reproduce them in the reader because of that, right? Along with, you know, someone like Greg Tate, Lorraine O'Grady, you know, Renee Ricard. They're all really wonderful essays, you know, that really kind of, I kind of imagine them as kind of like, you know, stepping stones, right? They really helped me understand what the questions I should be asking, right, about this work. And, you know, I always say that, you know, I study Jean-Michel Basquiat, but I also study the history of art. I'm just as interested in why he fell out of the history of art as I am in the work. And, you know, another piece of it was, you know, in this book, trying to reproduce all the interviews that Jean gave during his lifetime. These are really hard to find, you know, there's essays that, you know, there's a really wonderful essay that we know that Jean cited in interviews by Robert Ferris Thompson. It was in one catalog in 1983 that only had, you know, maybe 1,000 copies. So no one can read it, right? So I made sure that I put that in the book, right? Because we do have scholarship out there. We have the bell hooks and we have the, you know, the Munoz and so much more, but it's really, you know, in these very limited circulation, right? Media like exhibition catalogs or magazines.
Yeah, I remember I only stumbled upon those because I got Bell Hooks' Art on My Mind, and that was in there. And the Munoz was in volume on Warhol. I think it was in Pop Out, right? Yeah. And, you know, because these were subjects and writers that I was interested in, I found, you know, they found their way to me. But having the reader now is going to be amazing to be able to really, you know, choose as opposed to like, you know, what kind of like shows up, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And, you know, I really wanted to, you know, when I wrote the first book, I, you know, very clearly in introduction, you know, really said that this isn't, I don't mean my monograph to be the end of the conversation. You know, I want more people in this conversation. And I realized, you know, a few years after publishing it, that I was getting emails and calls and, you know, from researchers who wanted to work on him, but couldn't find any material. Right. And so I'm sending PDFs and things, right, to doctoral students in France, and realizing that, you know, this is really a source book, right, in a lot of ways for future scholars, as well as the general public who may be interested in this artist and not know, right, much about them other than what they see, you know, sort of in the streets.
It's a public service, Jordana.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, what's next?
3.
Oh, the numbers are going back up again. I thought we were going to go into like -2 and -6.
No.
Okay, 3.
No, 3 is a, you know, great number because this is the number of times it took me to really work up the nerve to approach the booth of Bruno Bishopberger at Art Basel. And I was, you know, a very young master's student at the time, thinking I might work on Jean-Michel Basquiat for my doctoral dissertation, but not really sure yet. And at the time, my mother, just by coincidence, was living in Basel, Switzerland. And so my advisor at the time, my graduate advisor, had always received like VIP passes to Art Basel, but could never go. And I said, hey, I'm going to be there for the summer visiting my mother. So I took his passes and I went to Art Basel. And, you know, Bishopberger, as I said, was one of the, you know, very important dealers for his work over his lifetime. And so I pretty much harassed the people at the booth of Gallery Bruno Bishopberger and sort of ingratiated myself to the director, Tobias Müller, who is still a lovely, you know, colleague to this day. And I think, you know, Tobias was a little confused by me, but intrigued, and invited me to visit him in Zurich the following week. So that was really the first sign of promise I had in studying this artist. I found that through all of this research, it is in many ways a collaborative project. I really relied on the kindness of people like Tobias or Suzanne Maluk or Michael Holman or Bruno to really get this work done, because I can't open those doors on my own.
Well, third time's the charm, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
54.
So this is,
54.
yeah.
I can guess what this is. 54 minutes between Basel and Zurich.
Yes. Yeah, I took the train to Zurich during the summer when I was visiting my mom, and I would go to the gallery, and I would be escorted up the stairs to the top floor and sort of put in this conference room overlooking Lake Zurich, the most beautiful scene. And Tobias would leave paintings that he had pulled out of storage there for me. And these are paintings that I'd never seen before, right? So it was really an incredible experience. He would show me the gallery files. I would sort of, go through everything, not really knowing what I was looking for, but just trying to, make my way through it. But I have really great memories of just sort of walking through the storage rooms of the gallery and, him quizzing me about the work. What is the title of this work? What year was this done? And that was something that I found throughout my research. There was always, and people know this that work on living artists too, there's always kind of a moment where you kind of have to prove yourself. Like, how much do you know? And I went through that a lot with not only Tobias, but also, Bruno and all the artist friends that I ended up talking to over the course of the years.
That's always great, that kind of that double pleasure, that you get when you answer right, and then you see how happy it makes the other person that you're with them,
Yeah.
in that love and that interest, in the artist and the concern for, the increase in knowledge that those engagements produce.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult, for anyone working, on a living artist or a very popular artist, right, to sort of prove that they're really going to do it, that they're really interested. And I think that a lot of galleries and families, states invest a lot of time in scholars that may not make it to the finish line. So I think there's always a little bit of reticence, a little bit of reluctance on behalf of people who I want to talk to.
Yeah, well, time is money.
Yeah, that's true.
4.
Yeah, 4 is the number of hours I spent sitting in the small sort of Yorkville apartment of Michael Holman. This is a great picture of Michael. He's the first associate of Jean-Michel Basquiat to actually give me the time of day. And I interviewed him in September of 2007. It was like Labor Day weekend. New York was disgustingly hot. I remember I bought these brand new flats from J. Crew that were rubbing blisters on my feet because I was circling the block. I was an hour early, trying to make sure I didn't miss this opportunity. But I just cold emailed Michael. I found his email on the internet. And he answered. So, we spent a lot of time talking about Basquiat and the music scene, downtown, late 1970s. He told me all about meeting Basquiat, who was then Samo, the founding of their noise band. I mean, I was just in awe. And, that interview, I published a significant portion of it in the Reader because Michael really has a lot of information about Jean-Michel's sort of earliest days as an artist and that moment of transition between musician and visual artist that he made.
So it was a good 4 hours, well spent.
It was great. I think it was my very first interview ever. And so I, in the moments of transcribing it, had wished that maybe I had cut it off. But who can cut him off? It was just it was a lesson, right? I was just getting a lesson the entire time. So it was a really, really rich experience for me. And to feel that, again, that sense of connection, that there's someone who really cares and someone who really is invested. And, Michael just sent me the most lovely email this week about the book, and just saying how much he, so happy, right, to have it in the world. And, I really do feel that with a lot of these people, I feel personally connected to them, right, that we kind of did this together.
That's nice.
Yeah.
2.
So this is a less exciting story. This is the number of times that Fab Five Freddy hung up on me.
That's so nice. Michael Holman, nice. Fab Freddy. Not so nice, huh?
I tried to contact him for an interview and he was not having it. But during my interview with Michael, actually, he said, "Have you talked to Freddie?" And I said, "Well, funny you should mention that. He won't pick up the phone." But Michael actually went over, picked up the phone, called him and said, "You've really got to talk to her. Please talk to her." And I don't really know what happened on the other end of the line, but we did not talk. It never happened. And I actually, just kind of funnily, in the book, I reproduce my side of that phone call, what I heard Michael saying, not knowing what Freddie said on the other side. But I think, Michael was so encouraging and so supportive. And I think he felt bad that he couldn't get Freddie to talk to me, that he actually invited me to a party that night. Come on, why don't we go to a party? The Bowery Hotel was just opening that day or that night. Why don't you come? And I said, okay, I'll go. I'm a super nerdy graduate student in art history, going to the Bowery Hotel opening for a birthday party. And I walk in and it's a birthday party for Suzanne Maluk, who's the former girlfriend and close friend of the artist. And she actually gave me my second interview, which I published in the book as well.
So it all worked out.
It all worked out. I would still love to talk to Freddie one day.
Yes. Well, Freddie, if you're out there,
yeah.
contact Jordana.
I would love a phone call. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of highlights, how protective people have to be, when they have these associations, and what you were saying earlier about, not knowing kind of where the research is going to go and who this person is, and should I entrust information about somebody who was really important to me and a big part of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very aware of, that because it's an artist who is so popular, so profitable, that there's a lot of ill will out there. I recognize that. And I also recognized in turn, that there is a lot of pain, on behalf of these people. I mean, this is their friend, their brother, their collaborator who's no longer with us. And they're forced to kind of relive that trauma and that loss, right? When I was interviewing some of these people, they would be crying, because it meant something to them. This is their life. And, I'll never forget when I was talking to Suzanne before this book came out. I met her in New York and we had a little chat. And, I said, I want to publish this so you don't have to keep doing this. I want to publish this so that this is out there, right? And you can point people to it and you don't have to relive this anymore. I think that there's part of it that's that, that it really is, I do see that there's a lot of reason behind that kind of skepticism and that unwillingness to cooperate.
Yeah. 11. It goes to 11. Is this like Spinal Tap where you turn the dial up to 11?
Yeah, this is how many months my son was, my first child, when I flew to Basel in May of 2010 to see the Basquiat retrospective at the Byler. And this is
so he might have been that loud, right? Like going to 11, like baby crying.
Yes.
No, okay.
Oh my God.
You didn't take him with you, did you?
No.
Oh.
I left him behind with his very capable father. But this opened, and this was really, an incredible moment for me, because it was the first exhibition actually curated by Dieter Buchart, who has gone on to curate multiple shows of Basquiat's work. And, I found it really clever. Dieter is someone who also is extremely knowledgeable about Basquiat's body of work. And, I felt like it was sort of this inside joke, the show, because there were several arrangements. This is one of them in the show where he's sort of putting echoes to past shows of Basquiat's, right? So he's like installing the works as they were installed in 1983. And I found that really rewarding. And I always loved seeing Basquiat shows. So this was probably the one that set it off for me.
Okay. What's next?
2. So this is the number of days. This is
2. We're still on 2.
I know, you can see this is another.
No, we were on 11. This is the second too.
I know, but
Okay.
it was that, I guess I could have said 48 because it was the number of hours that I lost my voice in Basel. So I get to Basel for this retrospective. I'm super excited. I've got research money finally. I'm a new tenure track assistant professor. And Bruno Bishopberger had finally agreed after 7 years to talk to me. And so I show up at the exhibition. I'm supposed to go 2 days later to his house and interview him. And for some reason, I completely lost my voice and panicked. But for some like miracle of like German medication and prayer, I got my voice back enough to interview him. And, you know, going to his house and watching Bruno sort of page through his heavily annotated dog-eared copy of my dissertation was an experience I'll never forget. You know, asking questions like, where did you find this article? And, you know, also like telling me when I had made mistakes, like this is wrong. I really have, you know, relied on Bruno as, you know, someone who knew the artist, worked with the artist from, you know, 82 to 88. He has an incredible knowledge of the work. And, you know, my dream, hopefully one day is to go back to Zurich and look through all of Bruno's files, his personal files that are in his home. And we had planned to do it last year, but then COVID.
Yeah, that, you know, having him holding your work and seeing that he had engaged it at that level with Post-its and dog ears, you know, and all of that, I mean, that must have been amazing. But also to think about, you know, that the gap there, the lacuna, right, you know, in the scholarship. And here comes this project, which is gathering so much together. And it must have been very exciting for him.
Yeah, I think, you know, it really does show kind of the level of investment and engagement. You know, Bruno, you know, I relied on him a lot in the writing of the chronology for this new book. You know, the chronology of Basquiat had not been updated since 1992, the very first chronology. And we had certain errors that had been repeated over decades. And so, you know, something as small as like someone's birth date. You know, I got a call from, you know, the estate. They said, you know, one of the Basquiat sisters' birth date was wrong. And that was something that had been wrong for decades. You know, Bruno was able to help me dig through some and find actual, for example, with an exhibition that happens in Tokyo, what works were shown, right? He's the one that has that information. So I really do rely on the kindness of strangers in this case, but I think it also shows the investment of these people who really feel like they want to get it right. You know, it's been really wonderful.
Well, you know, I really felt like with your first book, with reading Basquiat, that you got it right, you know, and your writing is so beautiful, Jordana. It's so lucid and engaging, and it's really accessible. You know, you talk about complicated things in ways that everybody can understand. And we have a couple of questions from the audience. You want to hear some questions? And this is one which connects with that, like with the beauty of your writing. Sam asks, which writers, art critics or otherwise, influenced you as you started writing maybe after you got past the dissertation phase? Or even maybe then, like who were your guiding stars for your prose and for the kind, you know, the way you assemble your arguments and deploy your research?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And they're going to be pretty diverse answers. I mean, I think when I'm thinking about Basquiat, I think that probably, you know, the bell hooks and the Greg Tate essays were the first things that I read that really kind of set me on a path. I would also really credit like Richard Marshall, who was a curator of that Whitney show in '92, who really wrote a very comprehensive essay that really outlined all of the themes that he saw in Basquiat's work. I think the sort of careful attention he paid to that was really incredible. I think the other style-wise, you know, I really, I do try to write very simply and very straightforwardly, almost sort of journalistic, because I think it's important to me to like not just speak to art historians. I want to speak to everyone. And I think conceptually for me, a really big influence was Cabina Mercer, who's another art historian. And in particular, he had written a series of essays on the work of Robert Mapplethorpe. And it was really impressive to me that he had written an essay on Mapplethorpe in which he essentially says, this is terrible, fetishistic, images of Black male bodies that are objectified and put on display for the white gaze. And then he writes another essay where he's like, well, maybe it's more, right? And I was always inspired by that because in working on someone like Basquiat and being the only sort of art historian so far to work on Basquiat, in sort of an academic, right, an academic position, I was always terrified of writing anything because I didn't want to be sort of the period on the end of the sentence. I wanted to be able to go back and revise myself. And I have, when I've written things after the first book where I said, like, I think that he's just a conceptual artist. Okay. We're just going to say that he was working as a conceptual artist. And I wasn't willing to do that in 2014. I'm more willing to do it now. So that was really inspirational for me. In terms of being able to approach a work and really think about how your own understanding can change over time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's there are a couple questions here that relate to young artists and to the fact that we lose these artists who are so impactful at a young age. And Paula Cooper points out that we also lost Bob Thompson,
yes,
who was just 27. He and my dad were buddies, and they used to party together and everything. And I remember hearing these stories about Bob
wow.
when I was growing up. And I also remember going to see Keith Haring when he was painting a mural at a gallery back in, I think it was like 84 maybe.
Wow.
And so Lewis asks, what are the connections that you see between Basquiat and Haring and like these other artists, with whom he was friends? We're all kind of working in that, that Lower East Side neighborhood. Do you see connections directly there? And maybe just if you can indulge me, Haring seems like an artist similar to Basquiat in terms of a kind of dearth of art historical scholarship.
Yeah, I think that, they really came up in the same moment, right, with the East Village art scene, with the rise and the popularity of graffiti. And they both, I think, suffered because of that early association. They were sort of popular and there was a lot of doubt circulating amongst the critics in that moment that this sort of rise of primitivism was really just a sort of obsession on the behalf of sort of the white middle class, and it wouldn't actually last. It wouldn't have a lasting impact on the history of art. They were friends. They knew each other. They hung out together in the club scene of the Lower East Side. Jean-Michel painted on a very famous work on Haring's studio wall, The Death of Michael Stewart, and Haring had that until his death. So I think that they share that sort of similarity in the ways in which they entered the art world. The difference is that, once Basquiat really went onto canvas, and once he went onto canvas, his practice did change, right? So he went from sort of these language-based works to sort of the more figurative work, the more conceptual work that we see on the actual paintings. And so, that's been a really interesting difference between the two of them, I think. The other thing that I would say with Haring and with Basquiat is that Haring actually writes quite beautifully about Basquiat and his legacy, and actually reproduce in the reader sort of in memoriam that Haring writes for Basquiat, and sort of talks about him being overlooked during his lifetime. And it's interesting because we could probably say the same for Haring, right? That he's similarly overlooked. I think the other thing that I would just sort of say about Haring and Basquiat that I think is interesting is their similar sort of adoption of a personal vocabulary, right? A personal pictorial vocabulary. And that's something that we see in Haring and we see in Basquiat. And that's something that I don't think anyone has really written about. But if there are any young art historians out there, I encourage you to do so.
Yeah, yeah. The three-pointed crown and the radiant baby. Huh?
Yeah,
There you go.
It could be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Well, we're just about at time, and I can see the sun moving across your face.
I know, I'm so sorry. I'm like, the sun is setting behind the trees and I'm like, you know, in and out of shadow here.
Well, it's very Mondrian, the shadows on your face. So we'll just do one last question, which is a past question, and it's like the past and the future. So you mentioned this, you know, kind of elegy by Haring. Were there any lost treasures? Josephine wants to know, were there any lost treasures that you found when you were putting the Basquiat reader together, that you were able to include? You know, what was your favorite gem that you rescued from the diamond mine?
Oh my God, there's so many. I think, I mean, okay, I'll just run really quick. One is I found the original flight manifest when Jean's father immigrated from Haiti to the United States. That was amazing. I found that there was an exhibition that's been published in every chronology since 1992 that actually was canceled and never happened.
Wow.
Yeah, that was great. In sort of transcribing, the other thing is I transcribed all of the interviews that he gave during his lifetime. And I had never, believe it or not, read them in order. And reading them in order, in chronological order, I was so struck by the sort of the palpability of his own growing disillusionment with the art world, right? He starts out so eager and he's talking to Henry Geldzahler and he's excited. And then at the very end, by his last interview, he just says basically like, you know, one of his last interviews, like, pretend I'm dead. I don't want to talk about it, right? So that was a really important thing for me, is to really read his words in that chronological order and really kind of tracking his development and as a public figure.
Wow. Well, maybe we should leave it there. Although I do want you to just say one little teeny bit about what's next for Jordana Moore Saggese. What is the next book project that folks can expect from you?
So it's you know, about 100 years earlier, but I'm working on the visual culture of Black boxers in the late 19th century and the ways in which these Black male celebrities functioned as a way to sort of shore up an ideology of whiteness in the Reconstruction period, and are responsible in many ways for the rhetorics we have around Black men as violent threats in our present moment.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to that. I'm a big 19th century fan, as well as contemporary. So there you go. Well, thank you so much, Jordana. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you so much, Jordana Moore Saggese and Gwendolyn Dubois Shaw, for that incredibly vibrant presentation and the engaging discussion that went along with it. It was really great to get such an intimate perspective into Basquiat's work. If you missed any part of this event or would like to share it with a friend, a reminder that a recording will be posted on this page immediately afterwards. All of our previous events are available to watch as well, and you can find those on paulacoopergallery-studio.com. If you'd like to reserve Jordana's book, you can send us an email at info@192books.com. You can also come to the shop for safe, socially distant browsing every day from 11 to 6 and until 7 on Fridays and Saturdays. You can also order from our bookshop.org page for direct shipment if you can't make it down to Chelsea. A reminder that you can also sign up for our email newsletter or check our website, 192books.com, for information about our upcoming events. And you will get the newsletter directly in your inbox about all of our forthcoming events, which are very exciting. We have one coming up on Claude Levi-Strauss and an event with Jeff Dyer. And that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thanks so much.